Mark Auerbach, how are you, sir?
Hey, how are you?
Good. Mark Auerbach is from Defend Ohio. What is Defend Ohio?
Well, the Defend Ohio campaign is an effort of concerned Ohioans from around the state who oppose Governor Kasich's attacks on public workers, unions, and public services in general. We're going to be coming together at the State House tomorrow at around 1 o'clock to express our views on his policies and divisive rhetoric.
That is a shame, because with the name Defend Ohio, I thought you were a Second Amendment group. I was ready to get my pistola and come out and join you guys. I was getting ready to march with you guys.
Sorry to disappoint you, Doc.
I like, well, actually, your name, though. I mean, Defend Ohio. I'm sure you see it as defending Ohio. I don't see it as defending Ohio. I see it defending union jobs.
Oh, well, the thing is, John Kasich seems to think that too many Ohioans have decent living wage jobs with health care and retirement benefits. Our point of view is that not enough Ohio workers have good jobs. We didn't get into this fiscal crisis because of unions, and we're not going to get out of it by demonizing them.
Now, wait a second. You really believe that the governor-elect thinks too many people have good-paying jobs? You really think that's what he's sitting around saying, smoking a big stogie? Let's kill some of those jobs because we don't want people working good jobs.
Well, thank goodness I'm not inside his head, but the policies and the rhetoric that he's advancing suggests that the problem is that too many people have good jobs, and we're somehow going to find our way out of this crisis by cutting wages, cutting jobs, and cutting services, and that is not going to do it. Public workers did not get us into this crisis.
Well, actually, they are part of the problem, and you know that, Mark. You understand that they are part of the problem. Unions and outrageous salaries are part of the problem.
Well, I would like to talk about outrageous salaries, like the salaries that Governor-elect Kasich wants to pay to his top lieutenants of $170,000 for a communications person.
Now, Mark, I will absolutely agree with you there. Absolutely. There is no reason that at the state level, I'm sorry, that person can make $75,000 a year, and that should be the top salary they'd be making. I'm going to agree with you there.
And Doc, these people, John Kasich and his folks, seem to think there's one rule for them and one rule for the rest of us, right? I mean, Kasich himself, he didn't mind taking $50,000 a year to give a few guest lectures at Ohio State University a year, right? But now he's coming into government, and the problem is public workers are paid too much. Most public workers...
Well, there's a little different there. I mean, he's being paid for his salary, and he agreed to that. I have no problem with him making as much money on the lecture circuit or whatever, or you fighting to get as much money as you can. The problem is when it comes to unions that are also public workers. That's the problem. We don't have unlimited funds when it comes to funding whatever, schools, roads, whatever. Mark, that's part of the problem. We are on an unsustainable path when it comes to funding all of this stuff.
We're on an unsustainable path, but it's not because of public workers or high salaries for rank-and-file public workers. We're on an unsustainable path because of a recession caused by misfeasance and malfeasance on Wall Street. The friends of John Kasich.
Well, now wait a minute, Mark. Hang on a second. Hang on a second. It is not only Wall Street. And anybody who suggests that's the only part of the problem here is missing a whole piece of it. There is a huge component that is the responsibility and fault of government. Number one, for not proper oversight of Wall Street. Number two, the housing industry. And number three, overspending by every level of government for decades. Those are the three components to why we are where we are now.
Okay, so let's look at this in Ohio, right? What happened is, we have a massive recession, people out of work. The Medicaid rolls go up because people lose their jobs and their health care. Do we want to put them out on the street because of that? No. We want to take care of our fellow Ohioans. That costs money, I'm sorry. The recession blew a hole in our revenues. It raised our costs. It is a big problem. On top of that,
how do we take care of them? You say we want to take care of those people.
Well, we do take care of them through Medicaid and through other social programs that John Kasich wants to cut. But the point here is that you want to blame public workers and unions for the crisis. What I'm saying is that this recession is a big part of our crisis. It's not like a chronic problem of rank-and-file workers getting paid too much. We have a deep recession that cut state revenues and raised state costs, right? It's a problem that lots of states and localities are facing. And the canard, the conceit that this is caused by rank and file union workers who are the people that live next door to you and me, just making a living, just getting by, making payments on the house. It's just not the case.
Well, that, as I said, Mark, that is part of the problem. Look at schools. We were talking about schools earlier. And other union workers as well. The retirement is crippling. The retirement packages are killing us, number one. And number two, that we have people that continue to have things like tenure. They don't get fired even if they're not doing their job. Salaries are inflated versus the private sector in many cases.
No, that's not true. There are plenty of...
Hang on a second. Let me help you out. I will qualify. You can look it up in USA Today. When it comes to federal workers, without question, they make $40,000 a year more when it comes to bonuses, salaries, and also retirement than the private sector worker, where there is a direct comparison. They make $10,000 a year more than the private sector, number one, in just salary, and $30,000 a year on average when it comes to bonuses and retirement. And in some other municipalities, whether it's local or state, those are the cases as well. And I'm sorry to say, Mark, when it comes to public workers, I think you should make less than the private sector, because that encourages people to work in the private sector.
Okay, well, there are studies on both sides of this. The problem is we have a crisis, and John Kasich is using that crisis to demonize unions, public workers, and teachers.
He's trying to balance the budget, Mark. We've got $8 billion.
Can I finish my point? He is not providing the leadership we need. He is not willing to listen to ideas other than his own.
What are your ideas? Lay it out. You've got $8 billion you've got to come up with for the state of Ohio. $8 billion. What are you going to do?
First of all, that's a biannual budget, okay?
Well, what does it matter? It's still $8 billion. What are you going to do?
It's a big crisis. And let me tell you, it's big enough that, you could fire all the public employees. It's not going to take care of that crisis. Okay, so I agree with you. We have a serious crisis. What we don't have is serious leadership. Okay? We have a leader who wants to drive a bus over people who disagree with him.
You're still not giving me ideas here.
The first thing I want to suggest is that instead of demonizing unions and public workers and going after public education, what we should be doing is getting everyone around the table to come up with solutions that cause the least pain and give us the best chance of coming out the other end, in good shape.
So hang on a second. Hang on. Let me make a point here. Let me get this straight. So you're saying John Kasich is not a leader. We have a lack of leadership because he, as you puts it, wants to demonize public workers and that. Even though he has a plan, he is still not a leader, yet you don't have a plan.
He doesn't have a plan.
No. He has laid out. He has laid out during the campaign, number one, and even since then, some of his ideas. I've asked you several times for ideas. Now you don't have ideas.
Okay, well, if you'll give me a minute,
please. Yes, I'll ask you again. What are your ideas for the $8 billion?
Kasich does not have a plan. He has warmed over trickle-down economics. He's using the budget crisis as an excuse to advance a stale old agenda. He has no plan that's going to solve the budget crisis. There's article after article. You ask him about the numbers on his proposals. He has no clue. He has no plan. He just has... Okay, this will make number 4 now. Hang on one second. Okay. You are using typical buzz phrase, trickle down, agenda, demonize, blah, blah phrases. And I will ask you for the 4th time now then. This is your forum on the 50,000 watt 700 WLW. If you have a plan, what is it to come up with $8 billion? Okay. First of all, we need to get together instead of attacking each other. Second of all, we need tax reform to make a more equitable and sustainable revenue system in the state. We need sentencing reform so that we're not putting nonviolent offenders in jail and dealing with all the costs of that. That population has gone up a whole lot. We need federal help to get through this crisis. Doc, states and localities have to run a balanced budget. The federal government does not. They can help states and localities around the country through this crisis. I know you're not going to like this, okay? But the stimulus money that came to us previously made a big difference for a lot of Ohio working families, okay? We're in a crisis. If the purpose of government is not to help working families, states and localities get through a crisis, I don't know what the purpose of government is.
All right, you laid out. Hang on a second.
You're not going to get over this hump.
Hang on a second, Mark. Hang on. I got to get a quick break in here, but I'm going to come back and address the three things. I want to keep you on hold here 1 second. Hold on a second. I'm going to get a break and come back and talk to you and kind of go through the ideas you laid out to see if they're possible. It's Doc Thompson, 700 W. Doc Thompson, 700 WLW. Mark Auerbach from Defend Ohio. Sorry about that. Get you back here and try to go over these. Okay, to cover the $8 billion deficit we have in Ohio, you mentioned federal help, sentencing reform, and tax reform as three of the things. First of all, federal help. Who pays the feds? Where does the federal government get money?
Well, you know who pays the feds.
Yeah, so
we borrow money.
Right.
We invest it in taking care of our people. When we come out of the recession and the economy is growing again, we'll have the revenues to deal with it. This happens all the time.
Mark. We have a $14 trillion national debt. So you want us to borrow more money and pay the interest on that from China, who is our competitor?
I think we're going really far afield. I'd really like to talk about...
No. I'm just going... You laid out federal help as one of the things Ohio... Federal help, we're bankrupt there, too, and that's also our money. But, okay, sentencing reform. I will give you sentencing reform. I think it's a little off topic when it comes to funding. I don't think it's going to save us all that much, but I do agree. I don't have a problem with decriminalizing marijuana and stuff like that. But the other thing, tax reform, you mentioned making it more equitable. What does that mean?
Well, I'd like to direct people to the Center for Community Solutions. They have a great study on the fiscal crisis, and they talk about the changes in our tax system in recent years that have basically made it increase the burden on poor and middle-class people, decrease the tax burden on wealthy people and on corporations, and we've lost about $2 billion a year in revenue.
So what does more equitable mean in your mind?
Equitable means that those who can afford it pay.
So part of the way out of the problem. Hang on. Part of the way out of it for Ohio, then. Hang on a second. Mark. Hang on a second. Are you gonna keep talking? So part of the way out of it. Part of the way out of it for Ohio, then you're saying with tax reform, which I do think we need tax reform, but to say more equitable, you're saying for Ohio, we need to get those rich people to pay more.
I think. In recent years, the distribution of the tax burden has been downward. And yes, we need to reverse that. We could go as a Center for Community...
Do you realize the amount of taxes that those rich people pay? They pay almost all of the taxes in America. Do you realize that?
All I'm saying, Doc, is that in recent years, we have distributed the burden downward to those who can least afford it.
I understand.
And in doing so, we have changed our tax system, and we have lost billions of dollars in revenues a year. I completely understand. Trickle-down theory,
Mark,
it hasn't caused an economic revival in Ohio.
I completely understand. It is simply redistribution of wealth. I get that. I understand it. Real quick, Defend Ohio. You guys are going to be protesting tomorrow. Give me the details on that.
That's right. Okay, we're going to meet at about 12:30 at 172 East State Street. We'll have some speakers, and we'll walk over to the State House. You can find more information at defendohiocampaign.com. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/defendohio.
All right, I am with you on the governor's people that work for him. He's got to cut those down. Appreciate it, Mark.
Great talking to you.
Mark Auerbach from Defend Ohio. It's Doc Thompson on the home of the Reds, 700 WLW. Doc Thompson on 700 WLW. Let's go to George now on a cell phone. How are you, George?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Fine, sir.
Well, that guy you had on, he had some really interesting ideas. The first thing I really got fed up hearing about how Kasich has no leadership. The man just got sworn in. He hasn't even sat down in a seat yet. So
he hasn't even been sworn in yet.
Yeah, so we got $8 billion in debt by the prior administration, but let's tax the rich. That worked well in New York, didn't it? They all moved.
Damn straight they did.
Yeah, they're going to leave town. You can't keep taxing the middle class because the low-income people, he's talking about equitable, the low-income people aren't paying any taxes, 80% of the taxes are being paid by the top 2% now.
Mm-hmm.
You tax them more, they don't invest, so then this is what happens when there's money being invested. Places shut down. He hasn't figured that out yet. What he's basically saying is, we're public workers. We're helping you. Keep giving us money. Kind of sounds like the school system, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, and they're technically public workers as well. Thanks so much for the call. Ken on a cell phone. You're on 700 WLW.
Yeah, Doc. I was just thinking about what that guy said about the public workers. I drive on the highway almost 24/7, and it upsets me to see highway workers. There be eight of them standing around, and 2 guys just doing work, and 6 of them drinking coffee.
We've all seen that, Ken. And you know what? There are good public workers. And there are, let's face it, when it comes to unions, and we've seen what they've done to the auto industry and whatever, you've got people that are protected when they're not doing what they're supposed to do. Yeah, I've seen those things too. I wouldn't say that's indicative of all of them, but it's certainly part of it. And that's the reason I laid out things like tenure where people can't get fired. And he didn't want to talk about that. And I laid out true numbers when it comes to federal workers, and he didn't want to talk about that. And I'm sorry, but public employees should get paid well, but a little bit less than the private sector, to encourage private sector. That's the key. But he didn't want to talk about that. I'm with him on the tax reform. Yes, we need tax reform. But when guys like that talk about tax reform, they mean sock it to the rich and continue to provide for their jobs. It's really selfish when you think about it. It's what about me and my job? Because he's worried about his job, and it's understandable, it's John Kasich has no leadership, whatever, even though John Kasich has a plan, and this guy really has no specific plan. We're talking with the guy from Defend Ohio about government workers. The problem is when you hear from people like that, and when you hear from a lot of people that oppose people like that, or oppose the ideas that he's bringing, they're still looking at it from a very selfish point of view. It's only about me and my job. I mentioned that the other day when it came to the rest areas. We don't have the money. Here it is. We're broke. $14 trillion at the national level, $8 billion with Ohio alone. Cincinnati, millions of dollars. Where's it coming from? You can't go to the feds and say we need $8 billion because they're short $14 trillion. Where are you going to get it? We're broke. The economy may rebound. It's not going to rebound to pay off $14 trillion. So let's take a moment before the entire thing collapses and say, what's the best way to go forward, even if the economy does get better? Was our last path a good one? No. So when it comes to things like rest areas, do you want that or do you want schools? Do you want rest areas or whatever else it is? Or do you want emergency services? You cannot have it all. All of the things we have been funding, you cannot have. Make decisions. What are your decisions? Well, if I happen to be somebody that works in a rest area, the selfish part says, well, it can't be rest areas, Doc, because that's my... Sorry, something's got to be cut. And it may have to be something you like. I'm willing to have things that I appreciate cut because I know it has to be done. But continuing to build things like sound barriers on highways and stuff like that, all that is union junk. It's bloated government and union junk. Let's continue to give people jobs by creating something for them to do. Hey, if we build walls, that'll put people to work. Unions get out there and push for stuff like that. Why? Because they want the money and to put people to work. So where are you going to cut? The guy I had on was 100% right. John Kasich is wrong to pay anybody in his administration $170,000 a year. We don't have the money. Anybody that works for him, I'm sorry, should be at the $75,000. The average person makes in the 40s, whatever. $75,000, a heck of a lot of money. So I'm not just saying go out here and cut the poor guy who's in a union who happens to work for the state who's making $35,000 a year. I don't want to just stick it to you. That's not it. I think you should make a little bit less in the private sector. But there are jobs that have to be done via state workers. For those jobs, yes, you should make, amount of money you can live on, whatever we can afford. But some of your jobs are going to have to go away. It's not that I want to come in and say, we need to cut you down to $25,000 a year. Some of your jobs need to be cut because we can no longer continue to fund everything. So if you are an ODOT worker and you're a union member and you're primarily responsible for keeping the rest areas in order, maybe your job should go away. Can't reallocate it because we're still paying it. So yeah, John Kasich, you're wrong. Don't pay the guy $170,000 a year. How many people are you going to have in your administration? Well, think about that number and cut it down by a couple. That's what we need to do across the board, including things that affect workers that happen to be union members that work for government as well. There's the reality of it. I'm not just a guy arguing that, well, first of all, I'm not the rich guy. I don't fall anywhere near a rich guy category. So it's not benefiting me to say, well, give huge tax breaks to rich people. Doesn't benefit me. It's the rich people pay most of the taxes anyways. Now, you want tax reform? He's right. Let's do it across the board. Let's everybody just pay a flat percentage. You want a sales tax, national fair tax? Fine. No exemptions for either one of them. That's how you do it.